Hi, and welcome to Contercast. My name's Cat Boys, and I'm joined, as ever, with my glamorous core co-host, David Jameson.
How's it going?
Oh, great. We planned to record this slightly earlier, but then we got distracted by the Dominic Cummings press conference chat thing.
Yeah,
And I feel like I was ripped off.
yeah. I saw you slamming its, being given the name Cumgate. I thought,
Honestly, David, there are people out there, serious, real people, who are using hashtag Cumgate, and
yeah.
I believe that that's an offence, right?
There's,
I
a,
believe
there's,
that if you've not done a criminal act, then if you're the sort of person tweeting about Cumgate, then you're probably going to commit a criminal act. So let's just make a list now.
yeah, I agree. I mean, there's a lot of people making much out of Dom and Cum out there in Twitter, and I think some sort of like
What, like a
police regulation
dominatrix
should be.
thing?
I assume so. Yeah, I mean, there's all kinds of stuff like that. What Twitter's like. It's absolutely filth. Some journalists in Scotland, by the way, are actually writing up about for mainstream newspapers about how horny they are, and calling on Nicola Sturgeon to make a special provision for singletons and so on. I mean, it's not John Knox's country anymore. If
Wait,
that can
what?
be,
People are writing articles for newspapers about being corny
yeah, in Scotland of all places.
in
I mean, I would
Scotland.
expect it in someplace decadent like California or something like that, but here in God's own country, it's not
Or
right.
in France.
Yeah, one of those filthy countries.
I mean, like sexy countries with sexy people. Do you know what I mean?
Depends how you look at it. So yeah, I thought the gate thing had died a death, incidentally, but it appears not. It's so strange, man. Like I don't know what it tells us at this point about the decline of kind of democratic norms. That this guy who I knew who he was before 2016 only because I'm that much of a politics nut and I read like character sketches about Michael Gove and stuff like that. But if you didn't do that kind of thing, you'd have no idea who he was up until 2016, quite possibly after 2016, because his legend only started to grow because people started to decide he was this kind of proto-fascist mafia character who had caused Britain to vote against its own wishes.
Mm.
And now, a few years later, it's only a couple of years ago, it was only last year that Cumberbatch portrayal of him on a Channel 4 drama,
The original Cumgate.
the original Cumgate. And everyone lost their shit about that because they portrayed him as this kind of revolutionary figure and all this kind of stuff. That was
I
only
mean, he's
last
got
year, I think, that
that
came
kind
out.
of Rasputin quality to him, or at least that's how he is presented.
And both sides like that. The right like it,
Yeah.
and the liberals like it. And it also appeals to, like we were talking about on the podcast where we discussed conspiracy theories, it appeals to mainstream attitudes about how history happens, both on the right and left,
Yeah.
which is the personal genius of a few great men.
Yeah.
But no one had heard of him really up until that point. That was about a couple of years ago. And now he is delivering a speech to the nation, having never been elected to anything, never been elected so much as, treasurer of local PTA. He's now addressing the nation with bizarre details about his personal life, about how he made decisions about how to travel the length of England and so on during the lockdown.
I mean, I think we should be careful about making a big deal of the fact that he's making an address to the nation having never been elected. Like, we are a nation of people who celebrate every year when an unelected lizard addresses us on Christmas Day. Do you know what I mean? Or, we're used to like being spoken to or spoken at by the ruling class and to watch their dramas like unfold. So I don't see that as like as part of the thing. What I find quite fascinating about it is that he's a backroom guy. He's not supposed to be giving press conferences. Like, the power of a spin doctor or a political fixer is that they're the power behind the throne. You know, they're not supposed to be the ones that are like out there in the cut and thrust. So I do think that this is damaging for him. Like, I've seen some stuff on Twitter with people saying, oh, you know, it's shameful, he's been given a platform, he doesn't represent anyone. And it's like, I think that this is, it's hard to come back from this, because his like MO is, you know, being the sneaky guy, like whispering in the prince's ear, like cartoonish almost.
Yeah, I mean, there's that saying about spenders that rule number one is don't become the story.
Oh yeah.
And I always remember that. I always remember that bit in The Thick of It, which I suppose is supposed to portray Alistair Campbell, but it could just as easily be someone like Dominic Cummings. And, you know, they have an argument where he says, you know, someone says to him, you've become the story, and he says, I'm not the story, I'm not the story. I always remember that kind of, and that's the beginning of his end sort of thing. I don't know. I mean, he's been the story now consistently for a good period of time. Partly because, like, the enemies of Johnson and Brexit want to make him the story in the way as someone who has perverted the national character towards this populist politics or whatever. But it's not really hurt Dominic Cummings up until now, as evidenced by the fact that the government won't let go of him. Like, he seems to have some kind of serious hold over the operation at Number 10. My theory about this is it's hard to see how, because on one hand you often think, they really can't find another guy to be rude to civil servants. Like, that's how invaluable he is. I assume that what's going on internally in the Conservative Party is, we forget that it's only 6 months or so ago that, well, sort of 7 or 8 months by this point, that Boris Johnson launched an unprecedented action within the Conservative Party to sweep out its kind of liberal wing and drag the party kicking and screaming in line with Brexit. And when I say the party, I'm talking about the parliamentary party and machine. I'm not talking about the membership of any pro-Brexit. Now, I wonder to what extent the Conservative Party is haunted by that situation, and to what extent Dominic Cummings is now totemic of that operation. Presumably he was the figure. I mean, he came up with the idea of proroguing the Parliament and doing that as a period to sort of settle the debts of the Conservative Party and so on. I wonder if he's totemic of the full stop that has been put at the end of decades of Tory infighting over Europe, and they're afraid to let go of him because they think that will let, you know, all those evil spirits re-emerge. Yeah. I mean, the Conservatives certainly are afraid of the Labour Party. So perhaps their greater strategic worry at this point is still the Conservative Party.
I mean, I think that you're right. I think Cummings is emblematic of the turn to like right populism of the Conservative Party. And I think that, you know, if I was in Boris Johnson's shoes, which clearly I'm not, but if I was in his shoes, I would be making a calculated decision about, like, in the long run, what's more damaging, facing down this, like the breach of the stay-at-home rules, or getting rid of someone who is completely emblematic of my political project. And I think he's obviously going to go with the former, like we'll just face it down. Like, we'll just have to like swallow a lot of shit and get through it. But the Labour Party is nowhere, right? I don't even think people know who Keir Starmer is, to be honest, right? I don't think anybody really cares either, apart from the kind of the liberal classes. So yeah, I think that you would make that calculation that the opposition is nowhere, and actually a lot of the battleground right now, like coming out of the crisis, is going to be inside the party. So there was already that story earlier this week when Boris Johnson told the 1922 committee that there won't be a public sector pay freeze after the coronavirus. Like, that's not going to happen. Which I thought was really interesting to like show some of those like tensions that exist. Like, he's not going to do austerity 2.0.
Yeah, so the spectre looming in the background here is the public, so-called, but really the working class, and how long you can manage the crisis situation in the working class and how you do that best. And I dare say that the arguments within ruling class organisations like the Tory party are going to be savage on those questions, because no one really knows. No one really knows how to deal with a situation of this severity. I think that in terms of the future of the kind of populist project in the Tory party, there's an interesting parallel to be done with Trump, because Trump got rid of Steve Bannon quite quickly into his regime in 2017. And he'd fallen out of favour before he was kicked out, because he was after that Time magazine front cover that called him a kingmaker or something like that. And Trump can't be bothered with this and got rid of Bannon, who, like Dominic Cummings, I think, in a sense, like, much too much is made of these people. Like, I'm such a weirdo. Years ago, I used to read Dominic Cummings' blog, and it's totally bizarre. Like, he's obviously a very intelligent person with a very creative mind, but his ideas are not really applicable. He's not really as hard right as someone like Stannon is. He's more like, he just thinks everyone's an idiot. He just thinks everyone in the institutional life of the British state is an idiot, and he can sort it out. But the thing is that Trump is the central character of the Trumpism phenomenon. Boris Johnson is not a hegemonic character in sort of on the right of British politics in the same way. It's interesting that
because he's too posh to be. He's too posh to occupy the same space that Trump does in America. Like, Trump can run all that, like, I'm a self-made man stuff. Johnson can't.
Yeah, I think that there is a real thing that Boris Johnson is, like, gaffe prone and accident prone and slightly ridiculous and so on. I mean, Trump is as well, but it's in such a different way. It's with Trump, it's like his absurd masculinity doesn't come across that way. Do you know what I mean? It comes across as like a force of nature. It is the poshness that makes the difference, isn't it? Like, Johnson's like a caricature.
Yeah, he's too much. Like, Boris Johnson's too much like a spitting image puppet, whereas Trump is like, I mean, we've talked about this so many times, but like, even his gaffes, like, I mean, he doesn't care what the liberal media say about him. He just does not care at all. And I think that the lines are much more blurred in the UK than they are in the States.
Yeah.
I mean, Trump's he's very American and so brash. Like, there's sometimes where I can't stop thinking about Trump in front of that banquet of fast food.
Oh, yeah. Who was he handing them out to? Soldier or something?
It was some people who were visiting the White House. Was it not like a sports team? I think it was a sports team that had come to like visit the White House, and like he put on this amazing spread that had like all the McDonald's meals and Domino's pizzas and Kentucky Fried Chicken. I mean, like the best of American cuisine. You couldn't imagine Boris Johnson doing something like as audacious and tasteless as that. Like, Donald Trump is very like nouveau riche, whereas Johnson is old money. You know what I mean?
Yeah. I think there's that saying about Trump that one of the reasons he has a cross-class appeal is what he presents to the American middle and working classes. I'm rich the way you would be rich if you had my money. Do you know what I mean? I'm not like, I don't go to the opera.
I would have like a sexy Russian wife.
Yeah, exactly, right. If I was rich, right, like most people they can relate to it in a performative way. Like, the first thing that comes into your head of like, if I won the lottery, right, it's big flash cars, sexy Eastern European wine, mounds of cheeseburgers. I mean, not one. One's for losers. Get a whole table of cheeseburgers, you know.
Yeah, he's like, you know that there was like a version of the Daffy Duck character where it was like the really rich uncle. I can't remember what his name was, and he would like dive into the safe with the big pool of money. Like
Yeah, I
that's
remember
what
that,
is
yeah.
that kind of rich.
Yeah, exactly. It's exactly. I mean, it's that kind of stuff. Like, you know, people mock Trump's like he has a gold toilet bowl and stuff like that. Uh, and you know, like his apartments are all decked out in gold and all this kind of stuff. But yeah, it's like people's view of what happens if a normal person got loads of money all of a sudden, and that's seen as somehow, because it's an achievement, it's less insidious than my money was passed down to me through 5 generations or whatever.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's apparent that the person who holds together the Trump project, I mean, Trump's a lonely person. Like, he's a lonely figure in the White House. He doesn't have anyone who's very close to him. And the person who drives the whole project and its public perception is him himself. And no one can disagree with him. Whereas Boris Johnson doesn't seem like the centre of his operation in government. He seems almost peripheral to it. He seems he's very indecisive. You know, he needs to be prompted to do things.
I think that's very telling. Like, when you look at something like Trump's Twitter, like there's very rare occasions where I look at his Twitter timeline and think that's an intern. Yeah. Like Trump is tweeting. Like, that's the president is tweeting.
There was speculation the president is certainly tweeting. There was speculation shortly after he came into office, like, I remember actually quite a lot of kind of liberal journalists in America like that, that the White House will not allow this tweeting to continue, right? And, you know, someone's going to come in and change up his Twitter and you know, someone will do it and stuff like that. And it didn't happen because probably someone tried to do that and Trump said, no, it's my Twitter account, I'm going to keep using it. And consider the difference between that and the fact that we just saw watching Dominic Cummings' speech there. He didn't even tell Boris Johnson that he was leaving work. Didn't tell Boris Johnson that he was leaving. And that one of the things that's going to obviously come out of this is, like, who's in charge. And some of that stuff is silly because I don't really think that Dominic Cummings is, channeling Satan into number 10 or whatever. To me, it's more a story of, like, the evident weakness of Boris Johnson, that, you know, he hasn't been informed. And indeed, Dominic Cummings doesn't seem to have any superiors. He didn't tell anyone. He told no one he was leaving the government and just quit town, which, is a really strange state of affairs. And what a I mean, it's one of those times when you get such an insight into, like, the lives of our best. He made his own decision, didn't tell anyone, got in his car, drove his family up north to his parents' farm, which has several houses. He was accused of wandering into some nearby woods. They're his woods. Yeah, they're his woods. He owned his woods. So he was still staying at home at that point, arguably, in his woods. And it sounded to me like the property borders a river. So does he parents own a section of river? I'm not sure. Anyway, they're the poor relations. That's the poor side of his family. His wife's family, his stepdad owns a massive castle that you need to check out because it's one of these great English country estates. His wife comes from some kind of old money, like much wealthier than Dominic Cummings' family. And she's the commissioning editor of The Spectator, which is it's not a job. So she's
speaking as an editor, you should have said.
That's the thing. I said sort of like, that is basically my job, but the parts aren't quite the same. But it was in The Spectator that people have been writing articles attacking Dominic Cummings as well. I kind of wonder what's going on there. But yeah, it's just a bizarre world. He was sorry that people were made angry by the media.
Oh yeah, I love that. Was a good little bit of spin. It was. I mean, it was so transparent, but it was good fun.
Always love a wee ton like that. But yeah, I mean, I'm also kind of left. I'm tickled by it as a situation. I'm also left just staring at this kind of odd guy reading out a bizarre itinerary of what he's been up to for a few weeks, thinking, you know, is this an important political development, or have I just been sucked into the spectacle now? Do you ever get that when, you know, people talk about like hyper reality and stuff like that? Have I just been sucked into the spectacle? Am I somehow taken in by all this? You know, I mean, I'm trying not to become enthusiastic about any of this stuff. I'm trying to maintain a degree of distance from it. We're all guilty sometimes of getting very excited about this kind of politics. There's a sort of titillation about it. There's a soap effect. But I mean, how much of this nonsense has gone on over the last few years, and how much of it actually turned out to be relevant? I'm all at sea in terms of predictions about what the consequences of this are going to be. Because what tends to happen with these stories is either the fanfare around it is animated entirely by a bubble of about 2, 3 to 5% of the population who are politicals and who are obsessed, and who are obsessed with it. And the rest of the country is paying no attention whatsoever and has no idea who Dominic Cummings is. I have no idea how many people even know who this guy is. I don't suspect it's a very large number, and whether or not it will pass them by, or it tends to do that, completely pass the country by, or for some reason it catches like wildfire in a larger part of the population because it speaks to a much more primal sense of what's going on in society. And it could feasibly do that. I mean, I think that it is powerful when people say, I didn't get to see my dad for the last time because I was obeying these instructions. I didn't get to see my child be born because I was obeying these instructions. And these aren't unusual situations. Millions of people in this country probably have an elderly or vulnerable relative who they've not been visiting, and it's been keeping them awake. So, you know, is that those grounds for a story that's taking on a huge, you know, representing a huge blow to the government? I just don't know, you know, and it's yet again that problem. If I don't know the distance between a small bubble of people who follow day-to-day events and much wider popular perceptions, which are hard to measure.
Oh, wait and see, I guess.
Indeed. And whether or not something like this can pop up again in like another 6 months, you know.
I mean, I think that we're so post-scandal as a society, like that it doesn't. I think Johnson has made a astute political calculation that, you know, it's better if this is painful and difficult, get through it in the short term. There'll be so much happening that the story will eventually go away, rather than like damage his political project, which is a much longer term thing. Like that's how I see this situation. But I mean, I'm sure more dumb stuff will happen.
Yeah.
I mean, hopefully, because I mean, we've got nothing else to do in the core, so.
Another thing we were going to discuss was UBI. So this is James Foley's article on Conter about universal basic income. I'm not sure that the arguments against universal basic income, for context, this has become a huge talking point, particularly on left-wing circles, about how the left should respond to the crisis. And it has a certain new relevance because of the large numbers of people out of work at the moment, and the speculation that, you know, certain industries just aren't going to recover for the foreseeable. For example, tourism. Large parts of the service sector will struggle terribly. Large numbers of small business owners are almost certainly going to be put out of work permanently. So the idea of a universal basic income that covers the entire population, is paid to everyone, and is enough to live on, has a certain new sense. James Foley's article is a kind of longer read which picks apart some of these ideas. The main one is, I mean, the starting point is that there are so many proposals for a UBI. Most of them fail on those criteria. It's either not universal, or it's not basic. It's not enough to meet basic needs.
I mean, what I think is interesting about the UBI concept, like, it's been around for a long time, but it's, you know, further up the discussion agenda I've heard it mentioned on BBC Radio a bunch of times already, since the crisis hit and people found themselves unemployed, but also because of like the stimulus check approach in the United States. And I saw a tweet today that was talking about how, you know, people are like, some pundits have been surprised that there hasn't been a big boost for like manufacturing or retail or in the car sector, because, you know, what if people spent the stimulus check on? And it's like, that's how out of touch a lot of people are. They assumed that people would get a stimulus check of, what is it, $2,000, and then they would go like buy a new car or whatever. And it's like, no, people are paying their debt, they're paying their rent, and they're buying food. Like, that's so a lot of the kind of like, it will help stimulate the economy arguments, like it's so low, like the amount, like it just meets everyday needs, like at the poverty line. I think, do you know what I mean? Like, I think that's often forgotten.
I think on a level of basic economics, before we get on to the, I mean, most of James's article discusses the class political implications of it from a sort of working class politics point of view, and its sort of worthiness in that situation. But there's so many economic issues that it just doesn't cover. I agree with the general critique that I think there are limits. You make an easy critique of sort of, nations with deficits and austerity economics and so on. I don't think it's particularly wise for the left just to imagine that there is a magic money tree. You know what I mean? Like, there are limits to that argument as well. But also that a universal basic income, the assumption of many people who advocate it is that we're entering into a period of economic development where there's going to be a long-term post-work condition for large parts of the existing workforce. A basic income doesn't touch on so many parts of the economy. It doesn't understand the extent to which frivolous and luxury and consumer goods are now quite a large part of developed economies. Particularly, in fact, in a period of relative economic stagnation. It's one of the features of the Great Depression, for example. There was shortly before there was a huge spike in luxury consumption, which made up more and more of a share of economic life because the genuinely productive parts of the economy were in crisis. So it doesn't understand some really basic realities of ocean of capitalist society. But on that, I mean, my general feeling about the way left-wing thought is panning out in this period, sort of social democratic type thought or liberal economic thought is, by which I mean sort of liberal left economic thought, is there's a certain obsession with policy fixes. There's an idea that you can supply a number of kind of one-trick fixes to various areas of the economy.
Well, I think that this is why UBI is synonymous with like the kind of Silicon Valley, Andrew Yang, like tech bro culture. Like, it's very much supported by a lot of those people from that background because it's a hack, right? It's like, you know, people see it as like a hack or, you know, a life hack. It's a way to kind of like skip what would need to be like a massive redistribution of wealth and power, and actually we can do this shortcut instead.
Yeah, exactly. And I think the point James makes in the article is that it's easy to understand why ideas like that have become popular on the left, where working class agency has been undermined. And people are starting to lose faith in the idea of political challenges and political organisation from below. So there's a want to kind of marry public anger and public sentiment, which does actually support significant economic change with technical fixes that don't require any kind of mechanism in between those two things. The desire for economic change up here and the low level of political organisation of subaltern layers down here. But we know from very hard experience that when you try to implement change on that basis, you really have no control over it whatsoever. And so with a policy like UBI, which is almost as popular in some parts of the neoliberal right as it is on the left, you're setting yourself up for a potentially very dangerous situation.
Yeah, but I think that this is why, like, an article that looks at UBI in terms of class and class consciousness is so necessary. Because if you have like the gods of Silicon Valley advocating for this as a policy idea, being like ideological cheerleaders of the concept of UBI, like it's not because they're the kind of techno utopists, it's because they're class conscious. Do you know what I mean? They have a degree of class consciousness, and their version of UBI does not like actually have a sharp edge where there's like do you know what I mean? There's like a radical, genuinely transformative potential, because that class would be against that. It's against their interests. This is like, we've talked about this before on the pod as well. Like, this is partly why I find a lot of the kinder, gentler politics stuff like really frustrating. It's because it denies class consciousness, like not just of like the working class, but also the ruling class.
And you do get people who argue, for example, that if you had a UBI, this could improve class consciousness and class organisation because people will be more willing to go on strike and stuff like that. To me, that has a very limited analytical value because I don't think it really understands the reasons why people don't engage more in that kind of collective action. It's not just at a time when working class people, when millions of working class people were much closer to the breadline, strike action was much more common. The prime problem in this situation is not that working class people are too poor and constantly on the verge of dying if they strike off work for a week. Although there are lots of people, as this crisis is revealed, who are in a very precarious position, have no savings and stuff like that. The situation is not as bad as it was, say, 80 years ago when Europe had some of its largest strike week. So the weird thing about it is it's a weirdly neoliberal response to that problem. We have a problem where there's a lack of collective class consciousness and organisation. How do we solve this problem? Monetize society even more. Throw even more private money pots at individuals. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Individualize that social relationship even more, and that will result somehow in more collectivized workplaces. There's no obvious kind of connection.
I get that, and I think that it's important to say that neither you or I are critiquing this from a sectarian point of view. Like, I don't want to just look at who is advocating for UBI on the neoliberal right and say, or the neoliberal left for that matter, and say because they advocate for it, then it's a terrible idea. Like, I think it's important to unpick it. And I think that, do you know what I mean? Like, so everything that I think we're talking about in terms of UBI is in that, do you know what I mean? That's the tone of it. I mean, the thing, there is this like that hack element to it, which I think is understandable, for all the time that I've been involved in the left, like, it's successive defeat, followed by some more defeat, and then if you've been really good, then a little bit of defeat for dessert. So I understand like why people are frustrated and want to see some kind of solution that's almost in a way like post-political. It's a administrative or legislative solution that will shortcut to raising class consciousness. But you're right, like, in what you're saying, like, there's no reason that would follow. And actually, I think that there's a real danger of UBI being like the end of collectivism. Do you know what I mean? Like, it's the ultimate privatization.
This strikes me as true not just of UBI, but of a lot of ideas, some of which are associated. So MMT, modern monetary theory, is another example of this. Not something I know a huge amount about, but it has the exact same smell in it. You know what I mean? It's sort of the problems in the economy don't fundamentally relate to social relationships between classes or something like that. It's all to do with sort of like money supply and you know, fiscal policy and all this kind of stuff, and misunderstandings, as though the enormous project of global austerity from 2010 onwards amounts to disagreements within economics, amounts to misunderstandings by right-wing economists. You know, certainly not. And I think, again, what's fascinating about this to me, though, is that I do think that this is part of a process of the decline and fragmentation of neoliberal orthodoxy. Some of us have been waiting for the death of the neoliberal orthodoxy for a long time. I suspect, of course, the reason that it's not dead is that it's not a debate. It's a power relationship between different parts of society. So it's going to actually have to be broken to be overcome. But at the same time, that orthodoxy is now so badly damaged that there is a fragmentation away from some of its fundamental economic certainties, which is, I think, partly where ideas like MMT and UBI come from. On a certain level, I think something like MMT is kind of cranky, but it does land some punches on the economic orthodoxies that rule us, and it would be hard for any concerted effort not to do that at this point. A much harder task for neoliberals to continue to make sense of the current situation through their sort of prison. So on that basis, I kind of welcome these debates, because it does show just how weakened neoliberal ideas have become. I mean, if you go into an economics department today at a university and you want to become an economist, and you're a young person, you don't want to become a neoliberal economist. And I'm not just saying that if you're coming from a middle-class background or a working-class background. If you go to Oxford or Cambridge and you're some partial, even if you're a Tory, you're probably not going in there thinking, you know, Hayek is where it's at. Some lose as well, but by and large, I don't think that's where ideas are heading in economics.
You should have been at the Gramsci reading group this week, because this was the big debate.
Oh, really?
Yeah, for sure. Like, is neoliberalism truly in crisis or not?
Interesting. I kind of wish I had seen that.
Yeah, so maybe we should dedicate an episode to that. Maybe we could get one of our comrades from the reading group along.
That would be interesting. Because I'm very split myself on that question.
When I was talking about like my concerns about UBI as like this like death knell for collectivism, like I think that there has been like the power and fearsome nature of neoliberalism as a challenge for the left, like the left's tendency to dismiss class agency as a real transformative power. Like, I think that that's definitely the project of things like New Labour, has been dismissing class agency. And you know, I always think of Blair's quote of Britain works best when unions and bosses work together, or whatever. Like, I'm paraphrasing, but that's the general point. So like that tendency to write off class agency has meant that class agency, where it exists, kind of like pops out. It's kind of like whack-a-mole. So like you have the 2014 Scottish referendum is like, it becomes a pole of attraction for class politics, or you have the referendum on the EU kind of pops up, and these are like two huge like poles of attraction for class politics, expressing the democratic deficit. And like UBI, like in certain contexts, I think can reinforce the the tendency of the kind of more establishment left to downplay the working class as a collective political subject, as the makers of change, instead like paying them off with an apolitical solution, and I mean, creating a even deeper, more embedded culture of consumer individualism, like a passive individual consumerism. So I think that there's really important points to be drawn out in this debate. Yeah, I'm glad we're starting to publish things like that.
Yeah, me too. Another thing that's coming up is this is the next in the Conter lecture series with Jody Dean. I believe you're hosting it. Is that correct?
I am chairing it, and I'm not gonna lie, I'm quite nervous about it.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So have you read any of Jody Dean's writings on comrades? Comrades, not allies, I think is the name of the lecture.
So I've read her book on the communist horizon, which is great. And I read her latest work, Comrade. She also wrote Crowds and Party. What I like about Jody Dean is she's taken some very very unpopular concepts of like comrade, the party, capital T, capital P, and communism, like these three kind of concepts that are seemingly outdated and have a very like sort of a particular history to them that people would sort of jerk back from, like in this kind of postmodern era. So like very representative of a grand narrative. And what she is doing is she's talking about their value for the left now. So the way that she talks about the party as an important place for the organization of left-wing people, and how the party develops left-wing intellectuals. I mean, again, we're talking about this stuff a lot in our Gramsci reading group. I think that stuff's really important, like having come of age in the left during a time of like real fetishization of horizontal structures, of like flat structures, a lot of organizational forms brought in by like autonomists and anarchists, like having experienced those types of organizations, like there is nothing I want more than to be part of a huge ideologically powerful party.
Yeah, no, of course.
with bureaucracy and all of these things. Like, I mean, I know I'm romanticizing it a lot in my head, but like romanticizing like the big communist parties of the early 20th century, I suppose.
Yeah, and it's strange to me how unexamined some of those attitudes gone on the left over the last 20 years or so. I mean, people forget this is a long-lasting orthodoxy on the left now of the kind of anti-party, faintly kind of anti-ideological sub-left. Like, people forget this has been the norm now for the life cycle of an average activist or something like that. And yet people constantly think it's new. People constantly think that horizontalism is a new idea. It's been new for a quarter of a century.
Yeah, well, she says like it transcends like the ideological divides like on the left. So there are, do you know what I mean? She references from Anthony Negri to Alain Badiou. Like they disagree on lots, but they agree on one central concept: no party, no leaders. And I mean, it's just like, I just don't think that works. I've never ever seen it work. I mean,
No.
please roll up in our Twitter comments when we tweet this article, or in the YouTube comments, if people can give me like a genuine example of far left organization, like, which is not single issue based, that is horizontalist in structure, that has managed to like weather all the storms.
Yeah, even survival would count as a success.
And it hasn't. It clearly hasn't, because the point of left-wing organizations isn't just to survive in this climate. It's to actually make a challenge, to have a confrontation with capital, to have a confrontation with power. And clearly, I mean, look at where we are. Like, that's not happening.
And one of the things behind Conter and the whole idea of doing this is that one of the saddest things about where the left has gotten into with these ideas and its general organizational atrophy is it's not even reproducing itself anymore. So the most basic function of any movement, of ideas and organization, is to recapitulate itself, year on year on year. And what you increasingly find is that that basic kind of stuff isn't being done, and that large numbers of people on the left are falling prey to enemy ideologies, frankly. So, like, it's become clear in recent years the convergence between a certain strand of centrist liberal politics in large parts of the left, and certain strands of postmodern influenced American identity politics and the left. It's become clear that we're essentially losing even our ideological hold over the small forces that we represent.
Sorry, I'm just realizing that my washing machine is on in the background, and that is 100% going to be in this recording. Just FYI.
It's unavoidable, I think, at this point.
Yeah.
But the thing about allies, this didn't really ever become a very big thing on the European left. It did in some ones. It's more of an American problem. I respect Jody Dean for being on these arguments in the belly of the beast as well.
The work that she's done on allyship. So the lecture on Thursday is called From Allies to Comrades. And it's like really about like going beyond identity politics, although we haven't put that in the title, because as soon as people see that, it just like inflames a culture war debate that's not what this is about. Instead, she talks about allyship as it's essentially like a part of neoliberalism, and you'll have seen these things. I see them on Twitter, I see them on Instagram, and in news articles like BuzzFeed will do one every now and again, Refinery 29 will do one every now and again, and it's all like how-to guides. Mm-hmm. So how can you, David Jameson, be a better ally? Because of your privilege, you need to take on the oppression of other people who are less privileged than you. But what that does, like a core part of Jody Dean's argument, is that what you are doing there, like it's not a moral judgment that she makes. She says your confrontation therefore is with yourself. Your confrontation is with like your own mind, rather than seeking it out. A confrontation that requires a collective potential so that you can confront capital, that you can confront systems of power. So the concept of allyship is bound very heavily into how to cultivate in one's self, how to decenter oneself, how to break down one's system of privilege within oneself. Again, it's this like privatization process, and the allyship reflects a bigger structural and political problem, which is like the shrinking of the political and the expansion of the personal, or the individualization. And she compares that to the concept of comrade. So there's this she has this like incredible way of talking about allyship that doesn't set off like all these like debates about identity politics, and instead she looks at it as a symptom of how politics has been essentially displaced into individualistic self-help Cali ideology. Like, it's been displaced into that type of language and way of operating that then plays out through a kind of social media moralism of communicative capitalism. Like, there's nothing that allyship does to build power. Instead, we focus on the small terrain of ourselves. So she talks about like individuals like sovereign states, each with their own particular set of interests, who, you know, guard those interests above all, but will cooperate when there is a self-interest in cooperating. What we have instead is comrades, and she breaks down like why comrade, like what does that mean, what's the effect of that. And I mean, it's a great read. Like, I don't want to just like, I don't want to spoil it all, but you know, I do love her work. Like, I find her really interesting. I really enjoy when someone's taken on like very unpopular concepts and trying to do something interesting with them. But, you know, at the same time, oh God, can I just be dead honest? Sometimes when I hear people on the left calling each other comrades, like, it makes me cringe.
Of course it does. Of course it does.
Do you know what I mean? Like, actually, see, when I'm saying it right now, like, I can feel like my butt cheeks like squeezing together because I'm getting a cringe. I hate all that like kind of faux lefty, like fucking Stalin meme shit.
Yeah, it's the most bizarre is if you've ever tuned into like debates at a Labour Party conference, and literally everyone is calling each other comrade, despite the fact that
they all hate each other.
Well, yeah, but also that, I mean, I remember watching Labour Party conferences like 10 years ago where people were doing that, and everyone's a Blairite. And there's all these Blairites and soft lefties calling each other comrade, and it just makes absolutely no sense whatsoever.
Yeah, so Jody Dean like uses a really broad definition. She's like people who are on the same side as you in the struggle. She also talks about it as like, it's not people that you necessarily like. These people aren't your friends. Like, they might be your friends and your comrades, but that's two different things. And that you have to sometimes put aside your individual wants, your individual needs, your individual desires in order to win for the common good, right? And that's an idea which fundamentally is attractive to me. Like, and that's what like big communist parties represented, was the setting aside of one's sense of self or ego or whatever you want to call it to the side for a collective greater good. That's what church did as well. Do you know what I mean? That's what religions did for people.
This is why that idea has fallen so hard out of favour, because almost all of the discussion about what happened to that model of politics is negative. Almost all of it is sometimes justifiably so. You know, even a communist party that was relatively small, like the Communist Party of Great Britain, it is true that its internal culture became ridiculous and bureaucratic and farcical and all this kind of stuff. And obviously the experience of the Soviet Union plays into people's perceptions of the dangers of these kinds of organisations. But all of that stuff forgets. I get the feeling, for example, that Jody Dean's work on this relates closely to a book that has become very fashionable in America again, called The Romance of American Communism, which is like a social history, like an oral history of the American communist experience, the experience of the American Communist Party, where people talk about how they were motivated into politics by the Communist Party. And I think that's an interesting discussion that is almost never had on the left today. What motivates activism? Because if it's not a sense of a large historical mission, a larger body of collective activity to which you are responsible on some level, I think what you're left with is a series of bad motivations. So guilt is a bad motivation to get involved in politics. If you're tempted to become left-wing because you feel like the world is suffering people and you're suffering less than them at large, you know, in general, that's a bad motivation, and it will lead to bad ends. Like, I don't really think that the left is that much absorbed by white guilt, or, you know what I mean, as some on the right would say. But to the extent that that's true, it's a bad motivation, and it drives people in bad political directions. It drives people to do things like it drives things like volunteerism, where you try to put yourself in the place of the oppressed, or you know I have something to talk about like neurodism, where that preceded but the Bolshevik experience in Russia. What radicals would do, they'd be middle class people who would travel from towns to live in the country where people were really suffering. You know what I mean? And there's still that kind of volunteer ethic on the left, but there are lots of other bad reasons to get involved in politics with which we are now very experienced. Careerism, bad reason to get involved in politics. I'm not looking at anyone in particular.
I love how this has descended into reasons not to get involved in politics ever at all.
Don't get involved in like careerism, bad reason. Self-aggrandizement, bad reason. Because you're a demagogue, bad reason, right? But these are the only options you're left with. What's a healthy reason to be consistently involved in politics? The answer to that is, frankly, and I think that people don't like this, I think there's two healthy ways to come into politics. One is that the circumstances of history have forced you into it, and that's something that occasionally happens, but which we don't really have much control over. And the second is an abstract, intellectual, moral in a sense, but some might say kind of like spiritual attachment to the idea of historical progress, to there a just course for society and an unjust course, and therefore subscribing to a historical analysis and a political analysis and a wider theoretical analysis that seeks to make sense of the world. People think that's dangerous. That's the thing. The postmodern era, people think that what I've just described is at best elitist, or at worst absolutely dangerous and certain to result in genocide. This is the thing.
Like, and this is the contradiction in that story, is like that a huge part of the blame for the fact that we disrespect the like kind of the grand arc of history is because the left like took on all these like postmodern ideas because it was embarrassed by the Soviet Union and couldn't win the argument. Like, this is something else that Jody Dean takes on full, like about like the Soviet Union. Like, do you think there's nothing to learn from that? Do you think there's nothing like positive we can learn from the Soviet Union if people can sit here and say that they can learn things from the last 300, 400 years of capitalism? Of course we can learn good things from the Soviet Union. And I like the way that she's pulling back like the curtain of shame and being like, hang on a minute, this is like, let's not throw the baby out with the bathwater. One of my favorite left-wing phrases. Well, phrases used by lefties that we know. But I think that the left has really, really bought into like a lot of postmodern ideas, that this was like the end of like the grand narrative. It's all bedded into like an embarrassment about like the collapse of the Soviet Union. And what's happened is that we've completely disrespected like the idea of intergenerational solidarity, the idea that as generations we are connected inherently as a class. Like, and that binds us together. So instead, politics plays out through like this okay boomer, right? So like okay boomer is a good example of what I mean. And I know it's a joke, but like it's a meme for a reason. Like, it represents something, which is like all the old dumb people like voting for Brexit and stuff like that, or voting no. Like, and but rather than seeing like that there is like a intergenerational solidarity that is necessary in order for us to progress forward.
But I also, though, I think even on a kind of intellectual level, what are the consequences of disavowing your ancestors? Like, it always makes me think about like what are the consequences for you, for your own sense of who you are and your place in time? Like, it always reminds me of that Christopher Lash thing.
Well, this is what I'm getting at.
Yeah, about the loss of a sense of historical time. You no longer feel like you are part of a historical trajectory of which people were part 100 years ago, and people will still be a part of that trajectory in 100 years' time.
What it does, like what I think it does to you, like psychologically, is it inflates your place. It inflates your place within this historical narrative, rather than seeing like your place within it as connected to the future and to the past. So you come from something and you're going in a direction, and you have a personal responsibility to your ancestors and to your children to fight for something better. Like, I think of there's this scene in the HBO series of Chernobyl, which I don't know if you've watched that yet.
Yeah.
You have. So you know the bit where they are
melting. Yeah, that's the best bit.
So that's like every episode. But there's this part, sorry folks for the spoilers, but there's a part where after the explosion, they need to, so there's like the party bureaucrat and the scientist, they come up with a plan, but it turns out through their plan, they're actually creating a potential thermal explosion. So the party bureaucrat and the scientist need to go to the workers to say, we need 3 volunteers to swim into this flooded basement of the nuclear power station and release these valves. It can only be done by hand, and it can only be done by you because you're the only people who know how to do it. And the scientist is given like all of these like technical reasons about why it needs to happen. Do you know what I mean? Like he's like the UBI left or whatever. Joke, right? You know what I mean? He's this is why this must happen, very rational kind of explanation. And then Boris, the party bureaucrat, he stands up and he says something along the lines of, we're born from 1,000 years of struggle and hardship, and each generation must know its own suffering. And I'm like, okay, yes, sign me up. I'll go. Like, I'll go. Yeah. Right? And then these 3 men put themselves forward for what is certain death, because these words that this man says, okay, so I know it's a fiction, don't at me, but the points that he is making, he's obviously scripted to be like a Communist Party bureaucrat, but there's a historical perspective there that these people will give their lives for, because they're connected to the past and they're doing it for the future.
Yeah, yeah. And I think, I mean, perhaps more so the Soviet Union of the 1980s. I mean, Christopher Lash describes these processes as developing in the late 70s, but I still think that you have that there. And let's acknowledge that that can be a very destructive force. Like, there's no need to sort of become anti-postmodern to the extent that you just sort of ignore the kind of pragmatic reality of the world that we're facing. You know, claims to national destiny, for example, have obviously been put to destructive end historically, right? But the idea that therefore any idea as big as that verboten is ludicrous. It's also, by the way, given the scale of the challenges that now face humanity. If you look at the scale of like the ecological crisis, I was watching Michael Moore's film, and he's the only one who produces all of it.
Yeah, you talked about this last week on the pod when you explained what carbon was.
That film, like, I can't get away from the ending, right? Which a brilliant case is made for the rubbishness of the renewables industry. And then the film ends by, sorry for the spoiler, I mean, it's not like a dramatic one, but the documentary film ends with a long sequence of an orangutan like drowning in some mud, right? Just thought, what a way to end a film which is about the analytical problems that face humanity, face civilization, right? human civilization faced this massive risk. And you didn't have anything to throw at us to get to motivate us to do anything about civilizational decline, except to throw us a muddy orangutan, right? And say, look at this and this shit. Look at this orangutan. It's all fucked up and covered in mud, right? And I just thought it's so lame. But it's also, that is how the left makes it. It doesn't say, it can't talk about generations. It can't talk about civilization. It can't talk about historical destinies or something like that. It just has to say, look at the nick of this shit. This orangutan is really covered in mud. Aren't you ashamed? Aren't you ashamed about this filthy orangutan? I've made so much of this monkey now, and it's such a horrible scene. Anyone watching this film is going to think I'm such a savage. Today on this podcast, I laughed about people dying in Chernobyl and the fucking death of a lovely orangutan.
And we've got like talking about national destiny and why people should never get involved in politics. This one might just get binned, man.
Yeah.
I blame the core. Let's just blame core brain.
Yeah. I mean, that's what Dominic Cummings is doing.
Yeah, I've been here like an hour. I need to make some dinner.
Okay.
So, folks, we've got our Jody Dean lecture on Thursday. You can sign up for that. It's free. You can go to contour.co.uk and sign up there. Yeah. You got anything else?
No, that's all.
Any Contercast announcements? You're away to what?
I'm going to make a steak bake.
Going to make a steak bake?
I don't know why I just had to expose how degenerate my life is there. I just feel like eating a steak bake. I've got a frozen steak bake in the freezer. It's grim, man. I
don't know you could get them. I mean, I'm not going to eat them.
You can.
Just because animals and stuff.
Yeah. You don't forget about that muddy orangutan.
Save the muddy orangutan.
That'll put you off an orangutan bait for life. That muddy orangutan.
Right, I'm gonna stop recording now.
Yeah, okay.